They always wanted me quiet, not silent, just manageable, just tame enough, just soft enough, just invisible enough to make them comfortable. I was born with fire in my chest, but they poured cold words down my throat the moment I learned to speak. Be quiet, be normal, be small. They whispered it in smiles, laughed it through clenched teeth, wrapped it in kindness, in rules, in expectations. They didn't break me, they trained me. They trained me to doubt my roar, to question my edges, to clip my wings before I even knew I could fly. Every time I stood tall, they pushed me down. Every time I questioned, they shamed me. Every time I showed strength, they called it too much, too intense, too cold, too different. So I did what they wanted. I put on their mask. I wore their chains like jewelry, smiled when I was dying inside. I dressed up my silence, painted over my fire, carved myself into their shape. But even masks crack, even silence screams. I watched them laugh at the weak. I watched them worship the fake. I watched them destroy the wild, the different, the raw. And I played along for a while, long enough to see the truth. They don't want peace. They want control. They don't want honesty. They want obedience. They don't want me. They want a version of me they can keep in a box. A version that smiles, nods, and never asks, why? But I've always known. I was never meant to fit in their world. I wasn't made for small talk and soft steps. I wasn't built for quiet hallways and empty praise. There's a storm under my skin, a beast in my blood, a hunger in my bones they'll never understand. They wanted to shrink me. Be quiet. Be normal. Be small. They didn't realize. Every time they said that, they added fuel to the fire. Every time they tried to bury me, they planted something darker. Because you can't kill a wildfire by pretending it's a candle. You can't cage a storm with polite words and sideways glances. They thought I'd stay hidden, stay silent, stay obedient. But the fire never left. It simmered beneath the mask. It waited for the day the cracks were wide enough. The pressure heavy enough, the silence loud enough. I looked in the mirror one day, and I didn't see their mask anymore. I saw me, the real me, the one they tried to erase, the one they called too much. And I smiled, because I finally understood. They never feared my flaws. They feared my power. They feared what would happen if I stopped pretending. They feared what would rise from the ashes once I tore the mask off. Let them fear. Let them squirm in their comfort. Let them choke on their expectations. Because I won't shrink again. I won't apologize for taking up space. I won't bite my tongue so they can sleep easy. Be quiet. Be normal. Be small. Number be fire. Be chaos. Be the one they never saw coming. They wanted me invisible. Instead, I'll be unforgettable. They wanted me soft. Instead, I'll be unbreakable. They wanted me to wear the mask forever. But masks crack and fire leaks through. They didn't hit me. They didn't scream. They didn't need to. Silence was their weapon, and they used it well. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that soothes. The kind that suffocates. The kind that echoes in your chest like you're screaming into a void. And the void doesn't scream back. They left me there. Not physically, emotionally, alone, unseen, unheard, and yet always watched, judged, measured against standards they never explained. I walked rooms full of people who looked right through me, spoke words no one ever answered, smiled at faces that refused to remember me. Do you know what it does to a soul? To be forgotten in plain sight, to be there, present, bleeding, and they pretend you're whole. They dressed their betrayal in silence, a silence loud enough to drown me, to erase me. They starved me of validation, then mocked me for being hungry, starved me of love, then laughed when I questioned if I was even lovable. I waited, I listened, I obeyed, I waited for someone to speak, for someone to see, for someone to say, "You matter." But silence sat beside me like a ghost, and it whispered louder than any scream. I listened to rules unspoken but demanded, to boundaries built with icy eyes and cold shoulders. Don't be too loud, don't be too strange, don't want too much. And I obeyed. I folded myself smaller, quieter, more acceptable. I swallowed my rage, bit down on my pride, clenched my teeth around my own worth until it bled. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I was good enough, they would finally speak. They would finally stay. But that's the trick, isn't it? Silence isn't absence, it's control. They didn't need to raise their voice. They just needed to withhold it. And I took their silence as gospel. I made it personal. I made it mine. I turned their neglect into my identity. I thought I wasn't enough. Thought I was broken, unworthy, forgettable. But that's not truth. That's programming. I waited. I listened. I obeyed. Until I started listening to myself. And I heard something they never did. I heard rage. I heard clarity. I heard power waking up. I stopped asking why they couldn't see me. I started asking why I needed them to. I stopped begging for space in their world. I started building my own, because that's what betrayal teaches you. Not how to crumble, but how to rise. That first betrayal, it wasn't a stranger. It was someone I trusted, someone who smiled when I was weak and vanished when I needed strength. They promised they'd always be there. But when the fire came, they let me burn alone. Friends who vanished when I broke. Family who grew silent when I started questioning. Mentors who said, "You're special," only to leave me stranded when I didn't perform the way they wanted. Silence wasn't random. It was strategic, a weapon, and it left marks deeper than words ever could. But here's what they didn't expect. Silence can also sharpen. Silence can carve a blade from bone. Silence can teach you how to roar, because when no one answers, you learn to answer yourself. When no one saves you, you become your own salvation. I waited. I listened. I obeyed. But not anymore. I've listened enough. And I hear the truth now. They weren't afraid of my flaws. They weren't afraid of my questions. They weren't afraid of who I was. They were afraid of what I could become. They were afraid of the voice buried beneath their silence, afraid that once I found it, I'd never stop speaking, afraid that once I stood up, I'd never kneel again, afraid that once I rose, they'd never be able to bury me again. They were never afraid of my mistakes. They were afraid of my strength. They didn't have to raise their voices. They didn't have to lock the doors. They didn't have to strike me down. They only had to be silent. Their silence was never empty. It was deliberate, calculated, weaponized, a silence that didn't soothe. It screamed, a silence that didn't forget. It erased, a silence that didn't heal. It cut deeper than any blade. They used silence like a leash, like shackles, like a cage with velvet walls, smiling on the outside, dead on the inside. They stood in rooms filled with love and left me cold. They called it discipline. They called it tough love. They called it boundaries. But I know what it really was. It was abandonment dressed as virtue. It was rejection disguised as guidance. It was fear, hiding behind forced calm. And I swallowed it. I waited. I listened. I obeyed. I waited for affection that never came, for validation that dissolved like mist, for the kind of love that wasn't measured in silence. I listened to the sound of their backs turning, to the praise they gave others, never me, to the vacuum they left in the spaces I needed them most. I obeyed, because I thought it was my fault, because I thought if I just behaved, they'd come back, because I thought silence meant I had failed them. But now, I know. Their silence wasn't my punishment. It was their fear. I was too raw, too wild, too real, and real scared them. They couldn't control real. They couldn't manipulate truth. So they silenced it. They silenced me. I became the ghost in the room, present but unacknowledged, breathing but unseen, hurting but told it was all in my head. You don't need bruises to be broken. You don't need screams to feel shattered. Sometimes it's the silence that carves the deepest scars. And the first time it hit me, the first betrayal wasn't from an enemy. It was someone who promised they'd never leave. Someone who looked me in the eye and swore they'd understand. Someone who said, "I believe in you," until I became inconvenient. When I broke down, they vanished. When I told my truth, they distanced. When I asked for help, they gave me silence. Not because I was wrong, but because I was too real, too much. And being too much made them feel small. Being strong made them feel weak. So they cut me off, not with a knife, but with distance, with silence, with absence that screamed louder than presence ever could. And I took that silence into my bloodstream. I wore it like armor, like chains. I waited, I listened, I obeyed, because I was trained to believe that silence meant I needed to change. That being ignored meant I needed fixing, that I was the problem. But the silence became a mirror. And in that mirror I stopped seeing their reflection. I started seeing my own. I started asking better questions. Why do they get to define me? Why does their absence hold so much power? Why do I bleed for people who won't even whisper my name? I stopped apologizing for asking. I stopped shrinking for silence. I stopped begging for presence and started becoming my own. Because silence isn't just a void, it's a forge. And while they thought I was disappearing, I was being reforged. Sharper, stronger, colder. They thought they were erasing me, but they were chiseling me into something they can no longer ignore. Now, I see the silence for what it truly is. Fear. Fear of what I represent. Fear of the truth I speak. fear of the strength I refused to suppress. They weren't afraid of my flaws. They were afraid of my strength, afraid that I would rise without them, afraid that I would become what they never had the courage to be, afraid that I would burn brighter than the small lives they built around me. They fed me silence, and I turned it into fire. They gave me nothing, and I turned it into everything. They tried to leave me voiceless, but now every word I speak is a war cry. They were never afraid of the noise I could make. They were afraid that one day I'd stop waiting, stop listening, stop obeying, and become the storm. Now I speak, and the silence finally breaks. There were nights when my mind became a battlefield, when sleep was a myth and peace was the enemy. Nights when I begged for silence, only to be answered by the scream of my own thoughts. I questioned everything: who I was, why I hurt, why I wasn't enough. I looked in the mirror and saw pieces, shattered fragments of a person I used to believe in. They said I was broken, and I believed them because it's easy to believe the worst. When the darkness is louder than your heartbeat, my hands trembled, my chest ached, my soul hollowed out by years of biting my tongue and bowing my head. I carried shame like a second skin. I wore guilt like a crown of thorns, and every time I stood, the world whispered, "Sit back down." Every time I spoke, they hissed, "That's not your place." Every time I dreamed, they scoffed, "People like you don't get that far." So I fell, again, and again, and again. But every fall taught me something. The ground doesn't define you. It dares you to rise. And one night, one quiet, violent night, I stopped waiting for rescue. I became my own. I stood in the wreckage, alone, exhausted, done pretending. And from the ashes of every lie they told me, I started building truth. They thought the fire would consume me. It made me, because I am not broken glass. I am molten metal. Bend me, test me, heat me to the edge of destruction. I'll come back sharper. I was not destroyed. I was reforged, like iron in a blacksmith's hands, hammered by betrayal, tempered by isolation, sharpened by grief. They called me damaged, but damage is only weakness if you stop there. I didn't. I looked at the pieces they tried to scatter, and I forged them into armor. Every scar became a symbol, every wound a warning to the world. I survived what was meant to kill me, and I didn't just survive. I transformed. I am not the person they left behind. I am the version they feared I'd become. The one who stopped asking, stopped explaining, stopped apologizing. They wanted me small. I became immovable. They wanted me tame. I became unstoppable. They wanted me silent. Now my voice shakes mountains. This isn't rebirth. This is evolution. An uprising that started inside my bones. A revolution lit by every no I was ever told. By every time they said, "You can't. You won't. You shouldn't." And now I don't ask permission. I don't seek approval. I don't wait for an open door. I build my own damn fortress. Because I wasn't made to break. I was made to rise. Harder, sharper, colder. Let them call it arrogance. Let them choke on their expectations. They tried to mold me into something soft, something palatable. But I am not clay. I am steel. and I remember everything. I remember the silence. I remember the betrayal. I remember how it felt to kneel and call it survival, and I'll never go back. I walk now with purpose, not to fit in, not to be liked, not to belong. I walk to conquer. I walk to remind them, you don't break people like me. You forge them, you refine them, you sharpen them into something you'll regret underestimating. I am no longer a question. I am the answer, and I'm coming, not for revenge, but for everything they said I couldn't become. This voice, it's not a whisper anymore. It's a war drum, low and rising, like thunder in the distance. And when the storm arrives, they'll know I wasn't broken. I was reforged. They called it anger, said I was too emotional, too unstable, too much. They told me to calm down, told me to let it go, told me to be the bigger person. But they never asked what set the fire, only why I refused to put it out. They feared my rage, because they couldn't control it, because it didn't bow, because it remembered. My rage is not a flaw. It's a record. It's a map of every betrayal, every insult, every back turned when I needed someone to stay. It's memory, and memory is power. They laughed, they mocked, they underestimated, they laughed when I cried alone in rooms that echoed their silence. They mocked when I spoke with fire in my voice and truth in my veins. They underestimated when I walked away instead of screaming. They thought I was weak, but I was waiting for the storm inside me to grow teeth. Because rage isn't chaos, it's clarity. It's knowing exactly what broke you and choosing to rise anyway. I didn't wake up wanting war. I woke up tired of bleeding for peace. They called me dangerous, and they were right. I am, because I no longer smile when I'm disrespected. I no longer flinch when they raise their voices. I no longer carry the weight of their guilt on my spine. I gave them everything. Patience, loyalty, my silence. They gave me nothing but reasons to burn. And I burned, not into ashes, into steel. They thought rage would ruin me, but rage refined me. Anger is not weakness. Anger is love that's been betrayed. Anger is trust that's been torn apart. Anger is what happens when you bite your tongue until it bleeds and still get called ungrateful. I am done bleeding for people who hand me knives with a smile. I am done burying my fire just to make others warm. There's a beast inside me, caged, chained, mocked by cowards who feared what would happen if I ever let it out. They poked it, prodded it, teased it, called me too sensitive, called me crazy, called me toxic. But what they really meant was, you're not afraid to feel. You're not afraid to fight. You're not afraid to be more than what they can handle. They laughed, they mocked, they underestimated, and I remembered. I remembered every name they called me, every room I was left out of, every lie disguised as concern, every smile that hid a dagger. I remembered, and I fed it to the beast. That rage, it's not eating me alive, it's feeding my power. Every time they tried to put me down, I grew. Every time they tried to shut me up, I roared louder. Every time they tried to cage me, they forgot beasts don't break, they wait. I used to think I had to heal before I could rise. Now I know. Sometimes rage is the healing. Sometimes the fire doesn't destroy you. It burns off the chains. Let them call it dangerous. Let them say I've changed. Let them whisper about my wrath. I hope they do. Because every time they remember my name, they'll remember what they did and what I became because of it. I am not sorry for the fire in my blood. I am not sorry for the storm in my bones. I am not sorry for the rage that kept me alive when love abandoned me. They want me to be soft. Let them choke on the ashes. They want me to be forgiving. Let them pray from a distance. Because I am done shrinking. I am done pleasing. I am done pretending. This is not bitterness. This is awakening. This is me becoming everything they said I couldn't be. Because I stopped trying to make them comfortable. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Let them underestimate. They built my fire with their doubt. Now watch it burn. There comes a moment when the path splits. Two roads, two fates. One leads to oblivion, quiet, comfort, disappearance. The other leads to dominion, to fire, to thunder, to war. And I stood there, betwixt the silence they gave me and the power I had to take. I could have let it go, could have buried the rage, could have folded into the shadows they shoved me into. But I didn't, because I am not built to vanish. I am not built to kneel. I am not built to apologize for the space I take. They gave me a choice, break or rise, and I chose dominion. Not the kind built on thrones of gold, but the kind carved from scars, forged from betrayal, stitched together by every time I was told to sit down and shut up. My throne isn't polished. It's cracked. It's blood-stained. It's built from the bones of every lie I swallowed until it choked me. But it's mine. They want to call it evil. They want to name it darkness. They want to label me a villain because I didn't break their way. Let them write stories where I'm the monster. Let them whisper warnings with my name. Because I am done explaining, done softening my roar, done pretending I don't want the crown. I do. I want it all. Not to feel powerful, but because I've already lived the powerless life, and I buried it, 6 feet under silence, shame, and obedience. They told me I was too ambitious, too wild, too much. They were right, and now I own it. Because if ambition makes me a villain, if standing tall makes me a threat, if refusing to shrink makes me dangerous, then crown me. Let them gasp, let them recoil, let them choke on the realization that the one they tried to erase became the very force they now fear. This isn't arrogance, it's clarity. I see who I am now. I see the war they tried to hide inside peace, and I won't play by their rules anymore. I don't want their table. I want to flip it. I want to burn the script they handed me and write my own. In blood, grit, and fire. This power isn't new. It was always there. They just kept calling it wrong. But there's nothing wrong with wanting more. More voice, more space, more control, more life. They call it selfish. I call it survival. Because the world doesn't give crowns to the polite. It gives them to the relentless, the ruthless, the rebels, the ones who refuse to disappear quietly. So no, I won't bow. Not to their shame, not to their judgment, not to their fragile morality. If I must be the villain in their story, so be it. At least I'm not the coward hiding in the crowd. At least I chose my path. At least I faced the fire and didn't run. I took the pain and I turned it into purpose. I took the betrayal and built my empire with it. An empire of shadows, yes. But those shadows, they're mine. They move with me. They answer to me. They exist because I refused to die in the dark. This isn't revenge. This is revolution. A war cry born from silence. A throne built from ruins. A ruler forged in fire. They thought I would fall, but I rose. And I kept rising until I stopped reaching for their acceptance and started building my dominion. They don't have to like it. They just have to watch it happen. Because I'm not coming to be accepted. I'm coming to reign. There was a time I begged for space, for acceptance, for someone, anyone, to say, "You belong here." I shaped myself to fit into cages, polished my voice so it wouldn't scare them, folded my power into paper-thin smiles, bit my tongue until it bled, just so they wouldn't. I asked for permission to breathe, to speak, to be, and still, it was never enough. They wanted me smaller, quieter, safer, and I gave them pieces of myself until I became a ghost, until I didn't recognize the reflection staring back at me, not because I had changed, but because I had disappeared. They made me stare into mirrors made of shame, mirrors that whispered, "You're not enough. You're too loud. You need their approval to matter." But I shattered those mirrors. With every ounce of silence they forced down my throat. With every look of disapproval they thought would break me. I shattered the mirrors they made me stare into. And in the broken glass I finally saw myself clearly. Not the version they sculpted, not the edited, filtered, shrink-wrapped version of me they could tolerate. I saw the truth. I saw the storm. And I smiled, because I finally understood I don't need their permission. I never did. I don't need their applause, their validation, their fragile acceptance. The world doesn't give crowns. You take them. You build them from bone and flame. You carve them with scars. You wear them like a war cry. Not for approval, but as a reminder that no one handed it to you. Everything I am, I built, piece by piece, choice by choice, not by being chosen, but by choosing myself. I stopped begging. I started building. I built strength from their silence, built confidence from their rejection, built presence from every room they tried to keep me out of. They said, "Who gave you the right?" I did. I gave myself permission to rise, to speak, to scream, to dominate. I gave myself permission to stop playing nice, to stop dimming my fire just because it burned their paper-thin egos. I gave myself permission to be too much, too bold, too loud, too real. And guess what? I am too much for them, and exactly enough for me. Look around you. How many people are still waiting, still hoping someone gives them the green light to live, still dancing in circles, hoping the crowd claps? Let them. I'm done waiting for applause. I don't need an audience to be unstoppable. I am not here to be liked. I am here to take up space, to bend the world to my will, to move like a force of nature, uninvited, unapologetic, unstoppable. They told me to wait my turn. I made my own turn. They told me to sit down. I stood taller. They told me to be patient. I chose power. Because power isn't handed to you. You rip it from the teeth of those who hoard it. You earn it in silence, and then you speak it like thunder. This voice, it doesn't tremble anymore. It commands. This presence, it doesn't blend in anymore. It disrupts. This fire, it doesn't flicker quietly. It demands to be seen, and I'll never be invisible again. I stopped asking, stopped shrinking, stopped smiling through the pain just to keep them comfortable. Comfort was killing me, so I let it go. I chose discomfort. I chose hunger. I chose the climb. Because on the other side of asking is becoming, and I became. Not by their rules, not by their timelines, not by their conditions. I became by choosing myself over and over and over again. So now I don't wait for the gate to open. I break it off the hinges. I don't wait for the stage. I build my own. I don't wait for permission. I move, because waiting is death in disguise. And I've already died once. In the eyes of those who didn't see me. I won't die again. So let me say it clearly. Let me say it for the ones still stuck in the chains of not yet. I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting. They used to laugh when I walked in. Now they flinch. They used to ignore me. Now they whisper. Now they stare. Now they fear. As they should. Because I'm no longer the broken thing they left behind. No longer the silent one. No longer the ghost that haunts himself. I am power. Not borrowed. Not gifted. Not begged for. Claimed. Earned in silence. Sharpened in solitude. Fed with betrayal. They wanted me humble. I came back. Ruthless. They wanted a puppet. I became a storm. Uncontrolled. Unapologetic. Unstoppable. Let them gasp. Let them choke on their own regret. Because everything they feared I would become. I became it. And more. I wear their fears like armor. I use their judgment as fuel. I turned their rejection into fire. And now I move through the world like a god unchained. They said, tone it down. I turned it up. They said, stay in line. I erased the line. They said, you'll never survive without us. I didn't survive. I dominated. And now they don't know what to do with me. Because they only knew how to deal with the version of me they controlled. The quiet one, the obedient one, the soft one. That version is gone, buried under years of silence, ashes under the weight of my rebirth. Now, I speak, and the room listens. I move, and the ground shifts. I show up, and the air gets heavier. Not because I'm pretending to be powerful, because I am. Because I earned this voice, earned this presence, earned every inch of the space I take. And no, I'm not sorry if it makes them uncomfortable. They had their chance to embrace me when I was soft. Now they'll deal with me while I'm sharp. This is who I've always been. I just stopped hiding it. I stopped making myself digestible, stopped editing my truth, stopped dimming the light just because it scared them. Now I walk with fire in my veins and thunder in my throat, and they don't know whether to kneel or run. Let them panic. Let them scheme. Let them pray that I'll be merciful. I won't be, not because I'm cruel, but because I remember. I remember every locked door, every empty chair, every time I was told I wasn't enough, when in reality, I was just too much for their small minds. They tried to cage a force. Now they deal with the storm. Let them call me a villain. Let them throw labels like daggers. None of them land, because I've built armor from their doubt, fortresses from their betrayal, empires from their absence. I don't need their approval. I don't crave their applause. I don't even want their acceptance anymore. I want their silence. I want their trembling. I want them to look at me and realize they created this. With every lie, with every exile, with every attempt to erase me. They sculpted their own undoing. Now they get to watch me rise, and they hate it. They hate that I smile now, not to please, but to provoke. They hate that my voice echoes, not in permission, but in power. They hate that I no longer ask to be seen, because now I demand to be remembered, and they will. Every shadow will whisper my name. Every wall will tremble when I pass. Every path they try to block will be shattered under my step. Because I don't climb ladders. I build earthquakes. I don't knock on doors. I rip them from their hinges. I don't play by their rules. I rewrite them. They wanted a puppet. I became a storm. They wanted control. I became chaos. They wanted silence. I became the roar. And if that terrifies them, good. Let it. Let them feel the dread they tried to feed me. Let them taste the fire they tried to snuff out. Let them stand behind their walls and pray they hold. Because I'm done knocking. Let them build walls. I will bring earthquakes. They always asked me, why can't you just be normal? Why can't you just fit in? And for a long time, I tried. I tried to wear their skin, to speak their language, to move in ways that made them feel safe. But I was never meant to fit in. I wasn't born to blend. I wasn't built to kneel. I wasn't carved from the same fragile stone they call tradition. I was forged in silence, in betrayal, in the slow death of pretending to be less than what I am. And now I remember the child they silenced, the fire they called too much, the dream they mocked because it scared them. I remember, and I reclaim it all, because I see it now, clearer than ever. They weren't trying to guide me. They were trying to contain me, trying to make sure I never realized what I truly am. A force, a storm, a kingdom wrapped in skin. And now I've shed their expectations like dead weight. Because I wasn't made to fit in. I was built to take over. Not through charm, not through peace, not through approval, through will, through presence, through fire they can't extinguish, built from silence, forged in pain, crowned by chaos. I didn't just survive the storm, I became it. Look at me now, not broken, not bitter, awake. I walk into every room like it owes me something. Because it does. Respect, space, reverence. Not because I demand it, but because I've earned it. Every scar, every exile, every betrayal carved into my back, like scripture. It built this kingdom, this version of me that no longer waits to be chosen. I choose myself, again, and again, and again. Let them call me arrogant. Let them call me dangerous. Let them say I've changed. Because I have. I outgrew their boxes, outran their limits, outlived their permission. This isn't rebellion. This is inheritance. I didn't climb the ladder. I tore it down, and I built my own throne from the wreckage. every piece, a memory of who I used to be. Every edge, a reminder of who I had to become. Because taking over isn't about control. It's about claiming the life they told you wasn't meant for you. It's about being unapologetic in your evolution. It's about walking through the fire and realizing you are the flame. I was never the outcast. I was the blueprint. They just didn't know how to read it. Too raw, too loud, too powerful. I've been all of those things, and I've never felt more alive. Let them whisper, let them plot, let them build their little walls. They'll fall, one by one, because power like this doesn't knock. It crashes, it shatters, it remakes the world in its image. And when the dust settles, they'll say I was ruthless, good. They'll say I was unrelenting, perfect. They'll say I took what wasn't mine. I took what they were too afraid to reach for, because I wasn't made to fit in. I was built to take over, not to destroy, but to dominate, to lead without flinching, to move without apology, to rise without restraint. Every step I take now shakes the ground they thought was solid. Every word I speak erodes the lies they built their lives on. Every breath I take is one they thought I'd never earn. And now they'll remember me. Not as the quiet one, not as the obedient one, not as the forgotten one, but as the one who didn't just rise, the one who reigned, the one who became everything they feared and more, the one who made the world bend, not with violence, but with presence, not with cruelty, but with unshakable certainty, not with chaos, but with command. They'll write stories of how I rose and how they fell. They thought they could forget me, that I'd fade into the silence, that I'd drown in the noise, that I'd disappear beneath the weight of what they did to me. They were wrong, because I'm not just a name anymore. I'm not just a face, or a moment, or a phase. I've become something else, something older than fear, something deeper than memory, something sharper than vengeance. I've become legend, the kind whispered in corners, the kind etched in scars, the kind that never dies. They tried to bury me in shame, but I rose like a phoenix with blood on my wings and fire in my breath. They thought the ashes would silence me, but ashes are just dust waiting to burn again. And I burned, not for warmth, but for war. I no longer walk like a man. I move like a force, like shadow slithering through locked doors, like thunder before the blade falls, like the beast they swore didn't exist, until it stood at their doorstep. I am no longer a person in their story. I am the storm that rewrites the ending. So if you hear my name, understand this: it is not a name. It's a warning, a prophecy, a reckoning. Because I don't come in peace. I don't come in silence. I don't come with mercy. I come to take, to claim, to conquer. And no, I'm not here to be liked, not here to be welcomed, not here to be understood. I am not coming to be accepted. I am coming to reign. They called me too much, too loud, too driven, too intense. They called me broken, called me dangerous, called me crazy, and they were right. I am all those things, and more. I am the nightmare their comfort tried to suppress. I am the consequence of their cruelty. I am the answer to every time they asked, "Who do you think you are?" This is who I am. The shadow behind the throne. The scream behind the silence. The sword behind the smile. I am the blood moon over their kingdom. The howl in the distance they pretended not to hear. The beast in the dark they told themselves didn't exist. Until now. Until I arrived. And I'm not knocking. I'm kicking the gates down. With fury they cannot measure. With fire they cannot contain. With hunger they'll never understand. Because I am not seeking redemption. I am not after apologies. I am not looking for closure. I am looking for thrones. And I will take them, one by one, brick by brick, kingdom by kingdom. I will take them, not because I want power, but because I am power. Let them run. Let them hide. Let them build walls tall enough to scrape the sky. It will not matter. I am the earthquake beneath their foundations. The flood in their fortress. The collapse in their crown. And when it falls, when it all crumbles around them, they'll whisper my name with awe, with dread, with trembling lips and shattered pride. Because they'll know they didn't defeat me, they defined me. They carved their names into my origin. Now I'll carve mine into their ending. Let every doubter remember. Let every traitor regret. Let the whole world watch. Because this is not a return. This is an emergence. This is not revenge. This is ascension. I will not be your memory. I will be your myth. So when they say my name, when it echoes through the ruins of what once stood tall, you will know. It does not call for applause. It does not ask for allegiance. It does not wait for consent. It commands two things: kneel or run. There is no third option. I am not coming to fit in. I am not here to blend. I am not here to make peace with mediocrity. I was never made to fit in. I was built to take over. And now I begin.